On today's show, we're talking about the Millennium Falcon drama. Why are some fans so upset about the look of the Millennium Falcon in the Han Solo movie? We're also going to talk some Star Wars Rebels. It's coming back tomorrow night. I'm excited. You're excited. What's going to happen? Is Kanan going to die? Is Ezra going to die? Well, gotta hope not, but probably. We're also going to mention some George Lucas talk. He was seen creeping around some possible set locations for a Star Wars film, leaving some fans to believe that Uncle George is going to come back into the fold and make some more Star Wars movie. Finally, we're going to finish off talking about a fan question about Supreme Leader Snoke being tied to Emperor Palpatine and that story being filled out in episode 9. This is Nerds Talk Star Wars. Let's do this thing. What is up, everybody? It's Josh. This is the Den of Nerds. It's Sunday night. It's Star Wars night. You're hanging out here, and we are going to talk some Star Wars. Now, I am flying solo for today, but we've got a lot of good topics I want to get into, and we're sort of evolving this show over time. I appreciate everybody that watched last week and the feedback that you guys gave us. Always looking to improve the show, and I think you'll see it sort of take on new life as we move forward. I do want to mention too that I'm starting a new live show going to be happening Monday through Friday starting at noon. It's going to be called the Nerdy News Rundown. It's really cool. It's a production out of a comic book shop. They're sponsoring it. We're going to do some giveaways. It's going to be really fun. But essentially at noon every day, I'm going to be talking about the hot button nerd topics out there in the world of fandom. So if you like some of the things that I say, or some of the things that come out of my mouth parts, maybe you'll want to subscribe and check out that show Monday through Friday, noon Eastern Standard Time. So let's get into the first story. I find this story very interesting and just kind of hilarious, but there's been a sort of uproar in the fandom. Have you felt it? It has to do with the Millennium Falcon, okay? The famous ship that made the Kessel Run in 14 parsecs. 12. I'm just kidding. I know it's 12. But that ship, which of course is tied to Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, is going to be in Solo: A Star Wars Story. And we saw some images of the Falcon with its nice paint job. The blue looked a little more racer. Then we saw the interior of it in the 2 trailers that we got around the Super Bowl, or the big game, I guess as I'm supposed to say. But those images did sort of show us a difference between the Falcon we're used to and the Falcon we'll get in this movie. But for whatever reason, the tipping point for fans was noticing in some of the toy descriptions and images that the section, the middle part of the Falcon in the front, which is usually empty and creates this sort of prong-like feature, is actually filled in by a segment. So there's something in there that's locked in, and a lot of people are upset about this. And I like I said, I find it kind of funny, but let's talk about it. So they're mad in some ways because this ship, the YT freighter, is literally teased in Revenge of the Sith. It's in sort of a weird cameo spot when you're coming into Coruscant, and it does not have the middle section in it. Now, I know that the Falcon and all of the YT 2400 freighters are designed to carry cargo and big pieces of cargo within space with that metal prong-like section. But it sort of makes sense to me that there would be something designed to fit in there. Beside the fact that we know that Lando Calrissian is going to have this ship at the beginning of Solo and probably lose it to Han by the end of that film. And because this guy's a racer, he looks like he's pretty clean cut into, looking really good and looking really nice. I think that that's why the ship looks so crisp and new, and possibly an explanation for why that front section is attached. I mean, aerodynamic wise, it makes a lot more sense to have that there if you're going to be racing. I mean, there's just way more drag with the ship with the prongs attached. So I don't think that the Star Wars creators are completely ignoring everything that's happened in Star Wars before. And as some people have mentioned too, it could be sort of a cool little Easter egg to the thing that Greedo says to Han at the beginning of A New Hope, he says Jabba doesn't like it when people dump their loads. And it's possible that that front section is just another compartment for carrying different cargoes. And wouldn't it be interesting if that section is literally dropped right before we go into A New Hope, and that causes all the drama with Jabba and Greedo and Han, who of course shot first. I don't know. It's kind of funny. I think that the bottom line here is that this show is, or the movie rather, is going to be taking place about 10 years before we get to A New Hope. So there's plenty of time for changes to be made. I also think that Han's probably a way less cleanly dude than Lando, which is why the ship gets so messy in that decade. So I don't know. I'm not super upset about it, but I wanted to address it because it's something that's going on in the fandom right now. So please let me know, guys. Are you one of the fans that's really, really upset about the changes made to the Falcon? Do you think that it's all going to make sense? And in general, what are your thoughts about the Solo movie? I was really, really on the fence about it, but the trailers really won me over. I'm incredibly excited for it. James keeps saying it's going to be hashtag top 3 Star Wars or best 3 Star Wars films. So what do you think about that? Let me know in the comment section below. Let's get into our second story of the day. This all has to do with Star Wars Rebels. This show is entering its final season. We're on the way out of this crazy, awesome experience that has been Star Wars Rebels. They did release a little clip sort of teasing the 2 episodes that we will get Monday night on the 19th. You may have already watched those episodes depending on when you're watching this episode here, but as of yet, it is unreleased. I'm incredibly excited. Now, the clip itself doesn't really give too much away at all. I sort of think it showcases part of the plan that the crew is going to come up with to go rescue Hera. It shows Kanan with his awesome new haircut, so we'll probably get him sort of committing to this, finding a new identity, cutting his hair in the episode. Ezra and Sabine are in TIE fighter attire, which is kind of interesting. So they're probably trying to get into whatever base Hera's being held at and do some sort of sabotage stuff, go unseen as Kanan takes his plan. We've already seen from the trailer that Kanan is going to at least find Hera. We assume the rescuing will go well, but a lot of people online are talking about how they think this might be the end for Kanan Jarrus. Now, in general, I have actually thought that Kanan will probably bite it by the end of the series. And a lot of people are of the thought that Ezra and Kanan both need to die before the ends of Rebels. Now, the reason they think this is because in the original trilogy, there's really no Jedi around. And we know that Yoda has spoken to Ezra. We know that Obi-Wan has spoken to Ezra. They're aware of who this kid is. And it seems really weird that they would consider Luke Skywalker the last hope and not try to get Ezra to help them out in the battle against the dark side, because Ezra is just simply so strong within the Force. So, you know, look, they say that he's the last hope in Empire, Luke, of course, and then Yoda says, no, there is another. And we think that was him talking about Leia, but when it was originally written, that was not the case. George was not going to make Luke and Leia brother and sister at that point. So he was actually talking about a mysterious Jedi that was going to end up being Luke's sister, but that's like kind of convoluted or whatever. So is it possible that Ezra is still around, still strong with the Force, and Yoda and Obi-Wan just didn't consider it to be his place or job to go fight Vader? It's possible. I mean, he's already been beaten by Vader. It looks like he might get beaten by Palpatine. Either way, it looks like we're heading towards a really, really interesting scenario at the end of this show. My personal belief and what I personally hope happens is that Ezra and Sabine just go back to Mandalore, because I think Mandalore is a place where we need to explore more in canon. I think there's just room for like whole shows focused on what is happening on Mandalore. It could be very Game of Thronesy because there's different houses. It's royal, it's regal, you know, castles, armor, all of that sort of cool stuff. But Ezra could be the link to some Force sensitivity there. Remember, they teased this guy Tar Vizsla in Star Wars Rebels, who was the very first Mandalorian Jedi. He wielded the Darksaber, is a very cool concept. And I would love for Ezra and Sabine to go back, just be Mandalorians, try to make their way there, and perhaps have children that maybe are Force-sensitive Mandalorians. That could be really, really interesting. And I think that could be a way for him to sort of be, sidestepped as far as not being in the original trilogy or mentioned really in that time period at all. We know that Thrawn's going to make it out. We know that Hera's going to make it out, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding everybody else. And although I don't want Kanan to die, I do think that when you look at some of the marketing material, it looks like Dave Filoni is sort of hinting at that, and he's going to break all of our hearts when he reveals that, yes, Kanan will die. But last thing I want to talk about with Rebels is the possibility that we will get the Mortis connection. There was the mural of the father, the son, and the daughter in the trailer that we saw for the second half of season 4 of Rebels. And it's possible that they're going to do something with Mortis. So if you don't know what Mortis is, you should really check out the Mortis episodes in Clone Wars. But it's essentially like a place that exists within the cosmic force, not really within the living force of our universe. And within there, these people are sort of the embodiments of the dark side, the light side, and the balance. Anakin was asked by the father, who was of course the one that represented the balance, to take his place and be the true balancing of the Force. The prophecy was said to link into that the chosen one was chosen to replace the father, becoming the thing that balances the entire Force. And some people think that Kanan, Ahsoka, and Ezra will go take the place of the father, the son, and the daughter in the Mortis world, and that could be really, really interesting. So that's a possible other scenario for them sort of leaving the fold of the galaxy and leaving us with almost no Jedi, which is what we think we need to have happen in the time period of the original trilogy. So I don't know, guys, let me know your thoughts. How excited are you for Star Wars Rebels? I mean, it breaks my heart that it's leaving, but I am super excited to see how Dave is going to finish it off. Remember, Filoni famously said he wanted to finish the series because he remembers what it was like to sort of make up an ending and sort of force an ending when it came to Clone Wars, because when Disney bought Lucasfilm, they told him to finish that series way before he was ready. I'm sure he still kind of feels salty about that. So I consider Dave a master storyteller. I'm really excited to see how he finishes this whole story out. It's been a very, very special thing with Star Wars, but please let me know your thoughts about all of that in the comment section below. All right, let's talk some Uncle George. The next story is about George Lucas himself, the creator, kind of poking around some places in Belfast, apparently visited some studios out there, had a very hush-hush visit. There were some photographs taken. He was said to be scouting locations for a future Star Wars film. There's a lot to this story, but at this point, all we can really do is sort of draw connections ourselves and think about what it could possibly mean. Now, because the fandom of Star Wars is in such a place right now where things are divided, people are looking for creative vision to take over. They want sort of a course correction from what has happened with The Last Jedi. It would probably be a good PR move to have George Lucas more involved and to have him come back into Star Wars. As far as I know, he has actually been at the visit almost all of the productions of all of these movies so far. Now, there was reports that there were bad blood between Disney and George because George had these treatments, these ideas for what he wanted the new saga to be. And when he took them to Disney, Disney apparently said, that's really, really nice, George, but we don't really want to do this. And out of those meetings and discussions sort of came the philosophy of George to sort of walk away, not be involved with Star Wars at that point. He didn't want to be creatively involved. This was when he was famously talking about the divorce thing, right? He made all those comments about, well, it's like divorce. Like you don't call, you don't drive past the house. When you're divorced, you're divorced. But he has a funny way of doing that because, like I said, I think he's literally visited the set of every single film. He also came out for Star Wars Celebration, which was a huge surprise and a big, big treat for fans. So even though there might have been some rocky road going on there, I think that a lot of those bridges are being repaired. Also, if I'm being completely honest here, I think that a lot of what we're getting in the new trilogy is actually from the mind of George. I think the big thing that was changed was the Rey character, which was Kira at the time that George was writing it, was no longer a relative of the Kylo Ren character, but instead a love interest, and sort of this star-crossed lovers thing that Disney is doing now is the big sort of departure from what George had envisioned and what they're now executing on. But I think that we're getting way more of George's vision in this new trilogy and in these other movies than a lot of fans are sort of giving Lucasfilm credit for. But all of that to say, what do I think is going on with George over in Belfast? Well, if he's just scouting locations, that would be good because nobody knows the aesthetics of Star Wars better. I mean, this is the guy that scouted the locations for all of the original films, created everything, set us on this path. So if they're just using him in that capacity, that would be pretty brilliant. But for him to be there himself and for him to literally look at that huge studio, because he was in some studio, which I think is considered the biggest studio in Europe. It was like this huge, massive, massive thing. So for him to be doing all of that, I think it might be a little bit more than just scouting locations or helping out on a project. The rumor right now is that George could come back and direct the Han Solo movie, or rather the Obi-Wan movie. That would be pretty awesome. I would be into that. I would be excited for that, but I almost don't think that's the best fit for him. Look, do I want the Obi-Wan movie? Absolutely. But I think that that's like sort of like an intimate, sort of personal movie. I don't think it's going to be as crazy and bombastic as, what I would want George on. So I'd prefer if George Lucas did some stuff for possibly the new trilogy that we're getting with Ryan or what we're getting with the Dan and Dave films. Now, I think the Dan and Dave films are the Old Republic. And since that's sort of taking stuff way back and sort of resetting up like the old history of this whole universe, I think it would be like a great thing to have the creator be a part of that. Plus, look at what's happened like with Attack of the Clones. We have that massive battle at the end, and you've got all the Jedi fighting all of the droids. Really, really dope, right? But imagine if those droids were Sith and you had lightsaber on lightsaber. Imagine a Lord of the Rings scale battle but between the Jedi and the Sith. And by the way, imagine George Lucas directing a film that is produced by Dan and Dave to launch off a new series of movies. That would be really, really incredible, especially if they're going to push the technology. So if they pushed the tech or pushed maybe the way they wanted to distribute the movie, perhaps putting it on the streaming service, perhaps doing like a film every 8 months or something like that, like whatever crazy idea they're cooking up there, I think that would be a great way to utilize George. And if he's going to be a part of that, it would be really, really awesome. So do I think it's possible that he's going to come back into the fold? I do. I do not think that it will be the Obi-Wan film. It's an interesting story. I'm going to keep my eye on it, but there's, like I said, it's all conjecture at this point. It's all speculation. Like we really know very, very little about what that is all about. But I want to know from you guys, what do you think about this? Have you heard something that maybe I have not? Really curious. Do you think George would be a good fit for the Obi-Wan film? Let me ask you this. What would be the perfect movie for George Lucas to come back and direct? That would be kind of a good question to ask, right? For me, like the first in a series of Old Republic films. That would be my answer. But I want to know your thoughts. Hit me up in the comment section about it. Okay. Now let's get into the last part of the show where we answer fan questions. Now, guys, please, if you have some awesome questions about Star Wars, leave them in the comment section of this video, or you can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Go to the Den of Nerds Facebook. I really want to turn the back half of every Nerd Talk Star Wars episode into addressing questions that come from you guys. I want to sort of build the model where we go over what's going on in the news, and then we talk about just some fan questions that are submitted by you guys, because I think it's a really, really cool way to interact with you. give you the content that you want. So this question comes from Jake Hansen, who's been a really awesome, great supporter of what we do over here at the Den of Nerds and at the Rebel Scum podcast. And Jake had a very interesting question about episode 9. He mentions the fact that J.J. Abrams said that he wanted to use episode 9 as a way to bring all of the sagas together. He sort of wants to tie everything up in a nice little bow. Now, some people have interpreted that to mean that it's the end of the Skywalker saga. I really hope not. I like the Skywalker saga. I want Reylo babies. I want more Skywalkers in the future. But in either case, it's interesting that J.J. would choose those words. Tying all together all of the sagas. And so Jake's question is, could that involve a connection between Snoke and Darth Sidious? Is there a connection between Palpatine and Darth Sidious? And will that be explored in episode 9? Now, I want to give Jake some credit here because he says, I'm not saying it would be the focus of the film, but sort of a thread that they discuss in it. And yes, I think that would be the way they did it, if anything, because you can't just make Snoke the focus of 9. I've talked a lot about this. I think Snoke is dead, 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 dead. He is not coming back. And yet, I am still very interested about him. I want to know more about him. So let's break this down a little bit. Before we watched The Last Jedi, the thought out there for the theory crafters and a lot of the fandom was, well, Snoke is this all-powerful being, likely from the unknown regions. There was a lot of little Easter eggs and hints set up in canon material that sort of implied this, right? At the end of the Battle of Endor and after the Aftermath trilogy, the Remnant, which was what was left of the Empire, leaves in a Star Destroyer called the Eclipse and goes out into the unknown regions. Now, we know that they essentially find Snoke out there or get hooked up with Snoke out there in the unknown regions, formulate the First Order, and come back from the unknown regions. And for a long time, they were actually operating out of the unknown regions, sneaking into our space, getting money, turning, politics, building an army, getting resources, and then going back out to the unknown regions. So that is super interesting. There was also this idea that Palpatine was sensing this great power out in the unknown regions, right? And so a lot of us believe, well, that's what Snoke was. He was calling out to Palpatine. He's this Force god, and that's the source of Palpatine's power. So the one way they could make the connection, just to answer Jake's question, between Palpatine and Snoke would be to explain that a little bit more and say, yes, Snoke was this crazy powerful thing, and maybe even he created Anakin Skywalker, right? Because the whole idea, I mean, think about how obsessed Snoke is with Vader, just the way he delivers that line, a new Vader, and like the bloodline. And why is he so obsessed with the bloodline? Why is he so obsessed with that? Well, maybe from way far away, Snoke was able to manipulate the midichlorians in Anakin's mom, blanking on her name right now, and create the life, right? Now, we had thought as fans that maybe Plagueis was the one to do this, and wouldn't it be whack if at the end of the day they still just made Snoke Plagueis? That would be insane, and another possible way to tie them all together. But the reason I sort of doubt nowadays that Snoke was that powerful thing that was out there is because of some of the stuff we get in the art books, right? So the ring that Snoke wears is literally like a fanboy ring. It has this metal from Chief Palpatine's private quarters. That's the gold, and that writing is from these ancient people that Palpatine also studied. So you have that, and the rock or the obsidian that's the jewel of that ring is from the catacombs of Darth Vader's castle. So you have this guy who's sort of a fanboy of Sidious and Vader, and the big reason that he doesn't call himself a Sith or Kylo Ren a Sith is because he says the Sith died with Sidious and Vader. They were the last two Sith. It's over, but yeah, he still has like a reverence for it. So to me, that doesn't really feel like the behavior of an entity that's incredibly powerful that was pulling all of these strings. It is possible that Snoke was sort of on a parallel path to Palpatine and looking for that power out there in the unknown regions. And what if He found it. That was the secret of his power. And that could tie into like a greater evil that's still out there that's manipulating things, causing the force to be off balance. So it depends on what JJ means when he says combining all of the films together. But I do actually think that that will have to do with Anakin. I mean, this is the Skywalker saga. The creation of Anakin was something that set the galaxy on a crazy, crazy path. I mean, that's what all of these films have sort of been about. And whether it was Sidious that did it, whether it was Snoke that did it, whether it was Plagueis that did it, or whether it was the Force that did it, that was insane. And if they can bring in the causality of that, they can talk about what that meant, why that happened, and tie it to Palpatine and tie it to Snoke, I'd be impressed. I'd give a golf clap. I'd be super happy about it. I think it could be a cool little thread on there. But you know, like Jake mentions, I don't think it could be the overall focus for the film. So that's kind of my thoughts on the Palpatine Snoke connection. Thanks again, Jake, for the question. I thought that was pretty cool. Bottom line is, I definitely want some more information on Snoke, but I almost feel like it won't come in the movie, maybe perhaps mentioned in the movie, but it could be fully explored in some comics or in some novels. I'm really curious about this guy, though. I mean, we know next to nothing, and we're still waiting on the novelization for The Last Jedi, and we're hearing that there's going to be a lot of answers in there. It's going to fill out a lot of things and perhaps make some of our frustrations go away, which is hopefully why they're taking so long with producing it. But at the end of the day, man, I don't necessarily want to focus on Snoke anymore in the story, but I'm really, really curious. So if there's a cool way they could do it, that would be dope. I'm curious about what you guys think about that, though. Do you think that's the way they're going to go? And how many of you are still on the Snoke is alive train? I'm really curious about that. Maybe we could talk about that in the comment section, because I just don't buy it. But there is some evidence for it, so I will at least give you that. Okay, so that's gonna do it for today's show. A little bit not as long as when I have a guest on here. By the way, let me know, should I try to go get some cool guests? I'm interested. I really want to be interactive with you guys for this show. We want to, you know, of course, tighten up the production, make it more of a podcast, full length sort of thing. But in its infancy right now, I would be curious. I mean, what kind of topics do you guys want me to go over? Do you want me to sort of review stuff that's going on in canon? I don't just want to totally bite the style of Jedi Council. I think that this should be a more personalized version of that, but really sort of giving you my thoughts on the topics that are going on in Star Wars and communicating with you guys in the way that we do it over here at the Den of Nerds. So let me know your thoughts about what we should do in the show. And please, hit me up with some interesting questions. I really, really want to grab some of your stuff and talk about it next week. I'll probably either have James on, or I'm working on a couple other guests that I think would be cool. But either way, let me know your thoughts about Star Wars and what's going on in the world in the comment section below. So that's going to do it for today's show. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.